Most men don't realize they're losing control at the exact moment they start chasing it. They think control comes from holding tighter, tighter to people, tighter to outcomes, tighter to certainty. They try to manage how others see them, how relationships unfold, how situations resolve. And on the surface, it feels logical. If you can control the variables, you can protect yourself from loss, rejection, disrespect, or chaos. But beneath that effort is something far more revealing. Fear. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of being powerless. Fear of not being enough if things don't go your way. The uncomfortable truth is this: the moment you need control, you've already given it away. People can feel it. Situations respond to it. Life pushes back against it. Control-seeking doesn't project strength. It exposes dependence. It tells the world you're reactive, invested, and internally unsettled. And whether it's in relationships, leadership, work, or personal identity, that energy never commands respect. It invites resistance. This is why the men who appear the calmest, the most grounded, and the most unshakable often aren't trying to control anything at all. They're not passive. They're not disengaged. They're simply anchored. Their sense of power doesn't come from outcomes aligning. It comes from knowing they'll be fine whether things go their way or not. That's what changes the dynamic. That's what flips leverage. That's what makes other people adjust instead of test. In this video, we're going to break down why seeking control weakens your position, how it quietly hands power to others without you realizing, and what shifts when a man stops gripping life from anxiety and starts moving from internal certainty instead. We'll look at how control shows up disguised as effort, explanation, overmanagement, and emotional investment, and why letting go of that need doesn't make you reckless, but formidable. If you've ever felt like the harder you try, the worse things get. If you've noticed that the moment you stop chasing outcomes, people suddenly respond differently. Or if you're tired of feeling like your stability depends on things outside of you, this video is for you. Because once you understand why control slips away when you seek it, you stop fighting life. And life stops testing you. Control doesn't begin as dominance. It begins as discomfort. Most men don't wake up one day deciding they need to control people, situations, or outcomes. It starts much earlier, at the moment uncertainty begins to feel threatening. When something matters to you and you don't know how it will turn out, the instinct is to manage it, to influence it, to steer it. That impulse feels responsible, mature, even intelligent. But psychologically, it's something else entirely. The need for control is a response to internal instability. When a man feels grounded, he can tolerate uncertainty. He doesn't rush to fix, chase, explain, or force clarity. But when he feels unsettled, emotionally, relationally, or internally, uncertainty becomes unbearable. That's when control kicks in. He starts asking more questions, sending follow-up messages, monitoring reactions, adjusting behavior, replaying conversations, and trying to predict outcomes. On the outside, it looks like effort. On the inside, it's anxiety trying to regain balance. This is where most men get confused. They believe control equals strength. In reality, it signals dependence. The more you need things to go a certain way to feel okay, the more power you've given away. You're no longer responding to life. You're negotiating with it. And people can feel that shift immediately. In relationships, this shows up as over-explaining, emotional monitoring, reassurance-seeking, or trying to manage how someone feels about you. In work, it shows up as micromanagement, perfectionism, or fear of delegation. In identity, it shows up as needing validation, recognition, or external certainty before you can relax. Different forms, same root. The belief that if you don't control the outcome, you'll lose yourself. But here's the paradox. The more you try to control external reality, the less control you actually have. Because control doesn't come from force, it comes from detachment. When someone senses you need a specific outcome, they subconsciously gain leverage over you. Not because they're manipulative, but because human dynamics always shift toward the person who can walk away without losing their center. This is why control-seeking often backfires. The man trying hardest to hold things together usually ends up exhausted, frustrated, and quietly resentful. He's doing more, explaining more, adjusting more, and getting less in return. Meanwhile, the man who isn't trying to control anything often appears calmer, more confident, and strangely influential. Not because he's playing games, but because he isn't internally bargaining for security. Control doesn't create safety. Internal stability does. Until a man understands this, he'll keep tightening his grip every time life feels uncertain, and wondering why the harder he tries, the weaker his position becomes. Here's the part most men don't want to hear. Control doesn't just fail to get you what you want. It actively pushes it away. Whether it's respect, attraction, cooperation, or peace, the moment you start seeking control, your behavior subtly changes. Your tone tightens. Your patience shortens. Your reactions become loaded. Even if you're calm on the surface, there's an undercurrent of urgency beneath your words, and people pick up on that immediately. Human beings respond to state, not logic. You can say the right things, do the right things, and mean well. But if your internal state is anxious, needy, or outcome-dependent, it leaks through everything. It shows up in how quickly you reply, how intensely you listen, how much weight you put on small signals. You start over-interpreting tone, reading between lines that aren't there, and reacting to things that don't actually require a response. This is where control becomes self-sabotage. In relationships, control often disguises itself as communication. You think you're being mature by asking for clarity, reassurance, or emotional alignment. But if the real motive underneath is to reduce your own anxiety, the other person feels pressure instead of connection. They feel managed instead of chosen. And once someone feels managed, they instinctively pull back. Not because you did something wrong, but because autonomy is being threatened. Attraction, respect, and influence all depend on freedom. The second someone feels like your emotional stability depends on their behavior, they sense responsibility they never agreed to carry. That creates distance, and ironically, the more distance you feel, the harder you try to close it, tightening the very loop that's pushing them away. The same pattern applies beyond relationships. At work, the leader who tries to control outcomes loses trust. People stop taking initiative. Creativity dries up. Energy becomes compliance instead of commitment. In social settings, the man who tries to control perception comes off rigid and insecure, while the man who doesn't care how he's perceived often becomes magnetic. Control repels because it communicates one thing very clearly: I don't trust myself to handle uncertainty. And that's the real issue. When you don't trust yourself to remain grounded regardless of outcome, you start outsourcing your stability to people, situations, and results. You need things to go a certain way to feel okay. That's when life starts running you instead of the other way around. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You never gain power by trying to control external variables. You gain power by becoming someone who doesn't need control to remain centered. The moment you stop trying to manage outcomes, you paradoxically regain influence, because your presence is no longer dependent on compliance. Control collapses when inner certainty is missing. And until that certainty is rebuilt internally, every attempt to control will quietly cost you the very thing you're trying to protect. If seeking control makes you lose it, then the obvious question becomes, where does real control actually come from? The answer is uncomfortable because it removes your excuses. Real power comes from self-trust. Not confidence, not dominance, not emotional shutdown. Self-trust. Self-trust is knowing that no matter how someone behaves, no matter what outcome unfolds, you will still remain steady, clear, and intact. When you trust yourself at that level, you stop trying to manage people, situations, or reactions, because you're no longer afraid of what happens if things don't go your way. That's when control flips. Think about the men who never seem rattled. They don't rush conversations. They don't over-explain. They don't demand reassurance. They don't need to win emotional moments. It's not because they're cold. It's because they're not bargaining with reality. They've accepted uncertainty. And acceptance is where leverage is born. When you accept that you cannot control how someone feels, chooses, or responds, you free yourself from the need to perform. You stop trying to say the perfect thing. You stop monitoring reactions. You stop adjusting yourself to keep the peace. Instead, you act from principle rather than pressure. This is where boundaries become effortless. You don't need to threaten, argue, or justify. You simply allow consequences to exist. If someone crosses a line, you don't scramble to regain control. You remove access. Not dramatically, not emotionally, calmly. That calm is what unsettles people, because calm communicates certainty. It says, I don't need to manipulate this situation to be okay. And the moment you reach that internal position, people start adjusting to you instead of the other way around. This is especially important in relationships. The man who stops seeking control stops chasing clarity. He no longer tries to extract emotional guarantees. He observes behavior over time instead of interrogating intentions. He lets patterns reveal themselves without interference. And because he's no longer forcing outcomes, he sees reality clearly. That clarity is power. You can't see truth when you're trying to control it. You can't read people accurately when you're invested in a specific result. Control blinds you. Detachment sharpens you. Here's the shift that changes everything. You stop asking, how do I make this go my way? And you start asking, who do I become regardless of how this goes? That question moves power back into your hands. Because when your identity isn't tied to outcomes, outcomes stop owning you. You become adaptable instead of reactive, strategic instead of emotional, present instead of anxious. And paradoxically, this is when life starts cooperating, not because you demanded it, but because you no longer needed it to. That's the moment control stops being something you chase and becomes something you naturally possess. If there's one thing to take from this, it's this. The moment you stop trying to control outcomes is the moment you regain control of yourself. And no one can take that from you. Most men never reach this point because they're still negotiating with fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty. But when you stop bargaining with reality and start standing on principle, your entire life recalibrates. Your relationships change. Your decisions sharpen. Your presence carries more weight. This isn't about becoming detached from life. It's about becoming grounded in yourself. If this video resonated, it's likely because you're already in that transition, learning to move without forcing, choosing clarity over chaos, and building strength that doesn't depend on validation. If you want more long-form breakdowns like this, on power, detachment, discipline, and rebuilding your identity as a man, make sure you subscribe to the channel. New videos go deeper into the psychology most men are never taught. And if this helped you see something more clearly, drop a comment and let me know where you're at in your journey. I'll see you in the next one.